Hello, I am back with another video, and today we will be discussing the future of the European Union, which may seem like a random topic, and it is, but I just wanted to talk about it. So, the European Union, I think everybody knows what the European Union is. It is the union of, I believe, around 30 member states. I think Bulgaria fully joined a few years ago. Um, and so, there's been a lot of questioning about what is the point of the European Union and like what does it actually do and why should I care recently in the news. And so I just wanted to kind of cover all of that. Um, so the European Union, I think, has been under a lot of criticism lately because it has not really kind of lived up to the function that it was supposed to do. I mean, okay, that's arguable. The main function of the European Union originally was to prevent um, France and Germany from going to war with one another, and on that front, it has been a massive success. No complaints there, massive success. Um, but especially in the face of kind of these threats from Russia and things like that, there have been a lot of questions about what what can the European Union even do, right? Because like all the support from for Ukraine in that war has come from basically the U.S. and more support I think has come from South Korea than has come from the European Union or NATO, which is kind of embarrassing. Um, my actual kind of thesis around this, I think, is probably that the European Union. I think number one, I think it will federalize, meaning that it'll kind of uh, become more of a United States of Europe kind of situation. But I don't think that'll be a good thing. I think there'll be a lot of kind of like resentment and internal rebellion against that. And the somewhat odd comparison that I make is to the late Qing Dynasty in China, right? So hear me out. So the Qing Dynasty, it was the last imperial dynasty of China, and it was basically it was also a union of very different kind of like peoples, right? So yes, there is China, right? But there's also Manchuria, Mongolia, Tibet, and Xinjiang, right? So there's basically like these five races under one union is what it was called. Um, and at the end, the it became so bureaucratic, and like the court officials of the Qing Dynasty just refused to like see the world as it actually was, and just kind of really stuck to their guns, and someone refused to change in any specific way, right? And any attempts to actually reform the dynasty were either suppressed or just ignored. So, um, for example, so when the West, right, when the Western kind of powers all came in, rushing in from the well, the West, um, the uh, the the authorities had the chance to kind of reform themselves and to actually become kind of like a modern power, but they were so stuck in like their old kind of Confucian mindset that they didn't really take that chance as well as they could have. Um, eh, right, so like Britain and like France and all these countries are talking about like cannons and weaponry and industry and things like that, whereas the Mandarins of the Qing Dynasty are still talking about you know uh, Confucian morals and filial piety and is this proper and things like that, right? And they were talking basically like saying, oh, these Westerners, these British and French foreigners, they're just barbarians, right? And so how dare these barbarians try to teach us what to do, right? Like we're China, we're the greatest empire in the world, but how dare these Westerners tell us what to do? Things like that. And so there was just a lot of kind of navel gazing and very kind of negative kind of thought processes that went on with that. And so I think it's very similar to Europe today, isn't it? Where there is a very kind of entrenched technocracy class, right? And so every European kind of complains about how, oh, the European Union is way too bureaucratic, it's technocratic, there's so much like red tape around everything. Every startup founder complains about how there's so much regulation and things like that. And I think that's pretty much analogous to what the late Qing Dynasty must have felt, right? Like, imagine if you were a genuine reformer, right? Like a weapons manufacturer or like somebody who wanted to kind of reform China in the late Qing Dynasty, right? You have to go through all the different all the different kind of layers of bureaucracy, and like you have to convince like this 80-year-old Qing Dynasty bureaucrat of like, oh, we need to import, these handguns to be able to defeat the enemy, and the bureaucrat just goes, we have, these bows and arrows, we have like these really old cannons, why learn from the barbarians, stuff like that. And I think right now, like with all the debates that are happening in the European Commission about, pacifism and should we rearm and should we not, and like we have like a 5-year timeline to kind of rearm but kind of not. We have a 10-year time, like also all the stuff like that. I think it's just um, I can't help but look at that and kind of think, oh, uh, this must be what living in the late Qing Dynasty might have felt like. You know what I mean? It might have felt like this exactly, where they are basically you just see a bunch of people just talking in circles amongst themselves, while the actual people that want to make change are kind of ignored and put to the sidelines, which is a very unfortunate situation. But it is happening today. Um, yeah, and so that was basically my central thesis, right? Like, is Europe falling like the Qing Dynasty? Um, Again, there are a lot of kind of points of contention to make here, right? So they're not similar. In fact, in many ways they're opposites. Right? In many ways they're opposites. But I think that's part of why it's so interesting. I think right. So whereas the Qing Dynasty was too closed, basically, right? So they had this policy of just like ignoring everything from the outside world and actually banning their ships from even sailing outwards, right? Whereas they had that kind of policy, the European Union has kind of the opposite policy of embracing everybody, right? Like when it comes to migration, or kind of like just more philosophically, like influence from America and things like that. And so they just have a philosophy of kind of accepting and embracing everything. But I think in both cases, I think in both the Qing Dynasty and the European Union, I think they went a little bit too far. I think you would agree, in their ideologies, and so now it's kind of causing a lot of like social tension, and I think a big thing that kind of precedes the slow decline of these polities is technological regress. So in the late Qing Dynasty, obviously, there were a right, the bureaucracy really ignored all of the kind of the warning signs that their technology and like their kind of like current like paradigm of things was not really up to date, and that the Westerners were way ahead of them. And I think in Europe right now, I think especially in the age of AI and things like that, they are really starting to feel that just now, that AI, and with, honestly, not even AI, right? Even before this, just like big tech in general, big tech is kind of missing from Europe. Like they do have a few big companies like ASML and things like that, but for the most part, they don't have their own Google, they don't have their own Amazon, they don't have their own kind of like own tech ecosystem, and so it's kind of very difficult to see how they can kind of leapfrog this technological gap, that they have right now. Yeah, so that's that. So there's kind of there are cultural issues, there are technological issues, there are political issues. So this is the last one, and I saved it for last because it's a little bit controversial. But I'm sure you've heard of the massive kind of anti-immigration rallies in the UK recently. And I am hesitant to make this comparison, but I think they may be similar somewhat to the Boxer Rebellion in late Qing China, right? So the Boxer Rebellion, if you don't know, was a rebellion of this society, called the Boxers, or the Righteous and Harmonious Fists, and it was very much a anti-foreigner kind of vibe, right? So like they want to target foreigners and Christians, because they believe that foreigners and Christians were ruining China at the time, and so they wanted to kick them out, right? So they resorted to very violent methods, right, with like murder and rape and things like that. Um, but at its core, it was basically a very violent anti-foreigner lash out. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in Europe too, right? So like both at the ballot box and just literally like very very violently on the streets as well, right? Um, and so again, I won't dictate anybody's politics here, obviously, right? And actually, a funny fact is that Mark Twain actually wrote a very famous kind of piece supporting the Boxers back when the Boxer Rebellion was happening, because he basically said, they're Chinese people and they're fighting for China, and uh, I wish him the best. He basically said I would fight for America like that, and so they're fighting for China like that. I mean, uh, again, the Boxer Rebellion is still controversial because of just how violent it was. But I do think there is a very kind of similar kind of undercurrent of just like very deep resentment, um, both against the current system and against foreigners, right? And those sort of linked, right? Because the perception is the current kind of government, the current kind of system allowed all these foreigners to come in, or their weakness allowed all these foreigners to come in, and now they're ruining the country. And so now we need to kind of revive the nation, right? So a lot of it, like these far right groups in Europe, are very similar to like the groups that were in China at the time, right? So with all the slogans of like to revive China, to reinvigorate China, and it was very kind of visceral for them too, right? Because uh, for China at the time, like their self perception of themselves was that they were the greatest power on earth, and yet that was just being shattered by the fact that they were just getting destroyed by all these Western powers. And I think it's very similar for Europe too, right? Like for the longest time, Europe thought it was the greatest power on earth, and like Eurocentrism basically uh, dominated the world for the past 300 years. And yet now they're kind of seeing like the former kind of strength and glory of Europe is kind of being relegated to like this weird melancholic kind of union, and it is being flooded by all these foreigners, and it's being threatened by Russia and apparently the U.S. too even, and just like on an international stage, it just appears very weak, and I think that really shatters the vision that he had of who they actually were, and so yeah, uh, the kind of the breaking of the fantasy, the breaking of the kind of the core thing that kind of held their pride together, I think is a very big factor um, in all this rage too, right? So just to summarize, these China, Qing Dynasty, and the European Union, they both used to be the greatest powers on earth, but they're falling behind technologically. They have a lot of kind of cultural and like bureaucratic issues, and they have a lot of resentment and anger towards the foreigner. And so I think it's a very kind of similar vibe right now. And so I mean, personally, I'm not hoping for the fall of the European Union. I actually think the European Union is a force for good in the world, and force for good in the world. And I think it's actually a very hopeful project. Like it's like when I was in elementary school, I wrote in my diary that my life goal was to create a an Earth Republic, just like the European Union, right? So I was 10 years old at the time, and in my diary I wrote my life goal is to create an Earth Republic, which is still my life goal. So uh, don't challenge that one bit. Um, cool. Okay, so that is the end of that video. Much more speculative. And so I've been wondering whether I should even post all these speculative videos because they're not as informational. It's more just like me ranting about like my ideas and comparisons. But I think just the comparison is very interesting. And so let me know what you guys think. If you guys disagree, please don't say anything. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Yep.